Ramaswamy. That had not happened before in this whole campaign. Vivek said nothing negative about Trump. Trump had said nothing negative about Vivek. In fact, he complimented him. So Trump took a shot at Vivek. 2 hours later, Bruce Rastetter endorsed Trump. Now, there are no coincidences in politics, and this, you know what that means. They're on that side. They're going to trample our property rights. Our salvation from that is Vivek Ramaswamy. And that's a great, big, clear reason why all of you should go to the caucus and put up a vote for Vivek, because if you don't, they're going to bulldoze our property through here. There goes free enterprise. There goes the American dream. The man that's going to restore this American dream for us is over here with us today, the next President of the United States, Vivek Ramaswamy.
We love you back. We love all of you here. And I want to just take a moment to recognize this man who actually everybody expected Steve King was endorsing Donald Trump. It was an honor when Steve King, a patriot who's actually spoken the truth, been tarred by the media for speaking hard truths, arguing to build the wall before it was cool. America First, before America First was a thing, to actually come out and endorse me like so many other constitutionalist conservatives in this state. It's been an honor, and so Steve, thank you for your advocacy on that important issue. I'm so proud to have been part of this movement. And thank you for that, too. I appreciate it. Absolutely. Actually do it this time. So I'll tell you a word about myself and our family and why we're in this. My parents came to this country 40 years ago with no money in search of opportunity. And in a single generation, I have gone on to found multiple successful companies. Did it while marrying my wife, Apurva, who is a throat surgeon at Ohio State. She's doing events across the state today as well. Raising our 2 sons. Following our faith in God. And I'm worried that American dream isn't going to exist for our kids and their generation unless we step up and do something about it. Now, the reason I sat down with Apurva a little over a year ago and had a serious conversation about why we as a family had an obligation, a duty to this country, to do what we're doing now. It came after that red wave that never came. You guys remember that? November last year, November year before last? What happened there? They'll blame Trump, they'll blame abortion. No, there's something deeper going on. It's that we as a Republican Party, we have lost our way. We have grown lazy. I don't mean lazy in the get out the vote operation sense of lazy. I mean lazy in a deeper sense of defining who we are and what we even stand for. See, the left is very good at this, actually. They'll give you a vision. It's not the right one, but they'll give you race, gender, sexuality, climate. And we're sitting here criticizing that vision without offering an alternative vision of our own. What do we actually stand for? What does it mean to be a Republican in the year 2024? What does it mean to be an American in the year 2024? To me, it means we believe in the ideals of 1776. Ideals like merit and the pursuit of excellence. That you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That is why I've said we will end race-based affirmative action and group quota systems in every area of American life. It has been a cancer on our national soul, and we are done with it. And thank you. It means we believe in the rule of law. And I say this as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. And that is why I've said we will use our own military to secure our own southern border and our northern border too. That's what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. It means that we the people create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government, not the shadow government in the deep state that runs the show today. So if there's one thing I get done as your next president, one war that I promise you I will wage and that we will win. It's not some pointless foreign war abroad. It is the war on our own shadow government right here at home in the United States of America. Let's get serious about actually, not talking about it, but actually shutting down the deep state. Here's how I will do it as your next president. On day one, we will put into motion a mass firing of 75% of all federal bureaucrats. That is how you drain the swamp. For government agencies that have lost their way, the FBI, the ATF, the CDC, the U.S. Department of Education, we're not just going to reform them around the edges anymore. We're done with that. We're getting in there and we will shut them down. That's how you revive our constitutional republic. I'm a CEO. Which one? ATF, absolutely. Absolutely on that list. ATF is one of my first five that we're going to actually shut down. And these aren't slogans to me. I want you to understand that. The FBI's got 35,000 employees. 20,000 of them are back office bureaucrats. They're going to go home and find honest work in the private sector. 15,000 of them are cops, investigative agents on the front lines. We'll move them to the U.S. Marshals or to the DEA, both of which have been far better at fighting child sex trafficking rings or the fentanyl epidemic. The U.S. Department of Education, I'm shutting it down not because I'm against education, but because I am for education. $80 billion of that taxpayer money, put it back in the hands of parents across this country. 3 armed security guards in every school across this country. So something like what happened in Perry never happens again. This is how we stand for we the people in this country rather than that federal bureaucracy. So will the press call this extreme? The mainstream media says this is too radical. You know what our founding fathers would say is this is the country that they set into motion. If they saw what we see today, they would be appalled. They would be aghast at what they see. If I can't be your next president for more than 8 years, which is a good thing, neither should any of those federal bureaucrats reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of civil service protections. That is how you drain the swamp. It's going to take a CEO who can do this. I'm not going to start with last year's budget as the baseline, which is based on the prior year's budget, which is based on the year before's budget. No. I'm going to start with 0 as the baseline. 0-based budgeting and ask what's actually necessary. That's how I've run my businesses. That's how I'm going to run our federal government. And that's how we're going to tackle our $34 trillion national debt problem for the next generation. This is how you drain the swamp. Let's get serious about it. These aren't black ideas or white ideas. These aren't even really Democrat ideas or Republican ideas. They shouldn't be. They're American ideals that we fought a revolution to secure. And one way we're going to secure them again is finally securing our elections in this country. One thing I will deliver to you, my top legislative objective in my first year, and we will get it done, is single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday with paper ballots, government-issued voter ID to match the voter file, and yes, English as the sole language that appears on a ballot. That's not controversial, that's common sense, and that's what we will restore in this country. You see, the problem in the last 20 years in this country, and I grew up into it. I'm 38. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. And I do think these revolutions, these revivals, they tend to be led by the next generation for a reason. Thomas Jefferson, he was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he invented the swivel chair while he was at it, believe it or not. Those are our founding fathers. Yes, these revolutions are led by the next generation for a reason. We need fresh legs. I think it takes somebody whose best days in life are still ahead to see a country whose best days are still ahead of itself. But what's happened in the last decade in our country is that my generation and younger, we have been taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways that we are really the same as Americans, bound by that common set of ideals. And here's how we're going to get them back. It's going to be by all of us. Not just me. Not just Steve King. All of us. Starting to speak the truth in the open again. There's a culture of fear that has spread across this country like an epidemic. Fear of losing your job. Fear of losing your social media account. Fear of your kids getting a bad grade in school. And that culture of fear has replaced our culture of free speech in the United States. It's going to require every one of us saying in public what you'll say in private at the dinner table. Say it with a spine. Say it with conviction. Say it with respect. But part of respect is that you respect your neighbor enough to tell them what you actually think. And you see, that's what this campaign is really about. Speaking the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it is hard. Speaking the truth, not just to the Democrats on the other side, but to our own side in this failed Republican Party when necessary too. The person who can tell you that I am opposed to that CO2 pipeline using eminent domain to seize the land of innocent farmers across this state. That it is based on a climate change agenda that absolutely is a hoax because it has nothing to do with the climate. The only person in this race who can tell you that Ronna McDaniel needs to step aside after 5 failed years of leadership in our own party, because if we can't hold accountability in our own party, we could never bring it to the federal government. The only person to tell you that I will pardon on day one every peaceful January 6th protester, because that's the right thing to do for this country. And I want to ask you, why am I the only candidate who can tell you these things? It's because our politics is corrupt. Every politician is dancing to the tune of their biggest donor. You heard that from Steve King before about the pipeline. Well, you know what? In my case, that biggest donor is me. I don't report to them. I report to you, the citizens of this country. I'm not somebody's circus monkey, somebody's pawn on a chessboard. That's what our politics has become. Frankly, I would rather speak the truth and lose this election than to win by playing some fake game of political snakes and ladders. But the bet I'm making is that is the winning strategy, that we trust the people, not to be sheep, to swallow what we're force-fed by the super PACs and the advertisements they've been flooding you with on television. No, that's not how we're doing it. I'm not bowing down to some overlord that just wants me to enact their own policies so they're able to line their own pockets. That's what's happening. Even the ones who pretend to be anti-establishment, that's how they're doing it. You want a real outsider, you got it standing right here in front of you right now. A patriot who speaks the truth. And if you want somebody who's going to speak truth to power, vote for the candidate who's going to speak the truth to you. God is real. There are 2 genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family isn't a bad word. It's the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism isn't something we should apologize for. It's what lifts us up from poverty, not crony capitalism, but the real thing. There's 3 branches of government in the United States, not 4. And the U.S. Constitution, it is the strongest and greatest guarantor of freedom in human history. That is the truth. We fight for the truth. We stand up for the truth. That is what won us the American Revolution. That is what reunited us after the Civil War. That is what won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is what still gives hope to the free world. And if we can revive that dream over group identity and victimhood and grievance, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus, not China, is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we will revive to save this great country. Thank you for coming out today, guys. God bless you and your families. And may God bless our United States of America. We will not stop until we get this job done. Tomorrow night we win the Iowa caucus, and then we win this primary, and we win the general. With your help, I will deliver you a landslide. 18 months from now, I'm going to sit across the table from Xi Jinping so I can handle the hard ones. We're going to open this up and give me some of the questions you guys have in this final hour before the caucus. Every one of your votes counts as the equivalent of 1 million people. I'm going to ask you to do the right thing tomorrow night. I'm asking for your vote. But today, you get to ask me the questions. So, sir, we'll start with you, and then we'll bring it up to the front. I can use the microphone with the guys in the front. You can use it there in the back. Cool.
Hey, man, to start with, God bless you.
Thank you.
I believe in what you're doing.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about this thing. There is a slim chance that you get shut out on this deal, right? So what I want to know is, as regular people who want some representation in this whole mess, right? we're not being represented at all. We work our butts off every day for a paycheck. They steal our money. They give it away. What do you think about the idea of a national labor strike? Truck drivers, people who work at 7-Eleven, the guy who is shoveling snow for a living today. What do you think if they won't hold themselves responsible, that we hold them responsible with a national labor strike where we just say we're not going to work until you get it together?
We saw, thank you, sir. We saw some of this with the Canadian truckers in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And you know what they did to them? They shut off their bank accounts. It's like the central bank digital currency they now want to bring to the United States of America. I feel what you feel, sir. The real dividing line in this country, we're in the middle of a war in this country. I'm going to say it in explicit terms, and I don't use that term lightly. It's not a war between black and white. It's not even really a war between Democrat and Republican. It's deeper than that. It is a war between those of us who love the United States of America and our founding ideals, and a fringe minority who hates this country and what we stand for. A war between those of us who believe we the people create a government accountable to us, and those who believe that it's a small group of elites in the back of palace halls that decide how we live our lives. A war between those who believe in merit and those who believe in group quotas. And I call it a war because there's no middle ground here. Either you believe one of these things or the other. There's no middle ground. That's why we're in the middle of a war for the future of our country. It's between the Great Reset and the Great Uprising. That's what's going on in this country right now. And so you're asking about the next step of the Great Uprising. That's what pulled me into this race. And so, sir, I'm here to ask you today to do the right thing. I hope we never get there. I hope we don't have to get to what the next steps look like. Our founding fathers did what they needed to do in 1776, so we could just follow what they set into motion and respect it. I think we live in a 1776 moment now, but I think we have an opportunity to do this the right way, peacefully, through our electoral process, if we're able to get this done fairly, and that starts tomorrow night at the Iowa caucus. So it is exactly the spirit of what you said. What can we do to address the system that's forking over our taxpayer money? We're $34 trillion in a hole, forking that over to places like Ukraine so some kleptocrat can buy a bigger house, cutting Social Security, Medicare, and veterans benefits here at home to write foreign aid checks to Central America, which is actually responsible for the northward flow of migrants to our own country. A tax code that's been weaponized to be able to go after people who the government disagrees with. The weaponization of government to go after political opponents just because you disagree with them. And yet, if a bunch of truckers standing up in this country like they did in Canada, you're darn sure they're going to try to do the same thing right here. The answer to that is a president who understands the law and the Constitution. This is our last chance to get this right. This is 4 years from now, 5 years from now, the interest payments on our national debt are the largest line item in our federal budget. We're toast. If my kids are in high school by the time we get this right, I don't think we have a country left. But I think this is our last best moment for me to tell you, this is how you do this. I'm not saying this out of self-interest. I'm telling you, this is why I'm in this race. I think this is our last moment to actually make sure that our country continues to exist, that we win this war for the future of our country. And so the way to do it, sir, is I don't think we're going to have to get there if we do the right things starting tomorrow night. That's why I'm asking every one of you. It's going to be cold. George Washington did not complain about the weather when he crossed the Delaware. I promise you that. We live in a 1776 moment now. And so I'm asking you for your vote tomorrow night. And if you do your part, I promise you, my family and I, we will do ours to make sure, not in some fake politician way, but in a true way, to make sure that our country's best days, including for every worker in this country, our country's best days, may actually still be ahead of us. You do your part tomorrow, I'm going to do mine. And that's the kind of strike that we need, is a strike at this caucus to say that we're done with the mainstream media's narrative and the establishment and the lies that they have force-fed you. Not only about our own movement, but even about me in this race. You want to stick it back to them. Do it tomorrow night, and we're going to get this right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. We'll go right back there, sir.
We're on the verge of war with China, Russia. We've got the Middle East conflict that had come up with North Korea. How do you solve that problem?
Sure. So my foreign policy is clear. And I think that the first step is clarity. The foreign policy establishment of both parties believes in what many of the so-called experts call strategic ambiguity. That we're not going to tell you what exactly we're going to do. That's how you get to World War III. World War III isn't in the interest of any country who enters it. But you accidentally cross red lines where no one knows what those are. That's how you get World War III. And I think there are some cynical forces in this country who are rooting for it, including those who stand to make money for it. I don't think that you should be allowed to start a military contracting firm after your time at the UN if you're using your connections to do it. I don't think if you're Joe Biden, Hunter Biden's son, you should be allowed to collect a $5 million bribe from Ukraine and then effectively push for those same policies to send $200 billion to that same country. So there are cynical forces in this country that stand to benefit from World War III that are marching our way straight into it. Here's my foreign policy. I'll keep us out of World War III by weakening the Russia-China alliance, and I'm happy to tell you how. I'll declare economic independence from communist China. We depend on our enemy for our modern way of life, from our pharmaceuticals to our military equipment. We'll put an end to that. That's the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson would have signed if he were alive today. And then here's the most radical one of all. Drives people nuts when I say this, but I'm going to keep my promise. We're going to use our own national defense spending to actually, foremost, defend our own homeland against the risks that we face right now, right here at home. You want to know what's going on at the southern border? It's not illegal immigration. It is an invasion. If there were 3 million Chinese on our western border or 3 million Iranians on our eastern border, we'd call that an invasion. It's no different when it's 8 million at our own southern border, many of which are actually goaded by China to actually come in here. So I think I'm going to put an end to that. Cyber attacks, super EMP attacks, missile defenses, all of which we're missing today. Make sure our national defense spending is spending our own homeland. I'll end the war in Ukraine with a reasonable deal that requires Russia to exit its military alliance with China. And in return, we will say that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. I think NATO expansionism has actually been a disaster. And any international institution that's hostile to our own sovereignty, from the WHO to the UN, I'm very open to questioning our continued involvement if these institutions have lost their way when North Korea, Iran, Venezuela are sitting on the Human Rights Council of the UN and they're effectively doing China's bidding, shackling the United States while leaving China untouched. We have to revisit a lot of the assumptions of our failed foreign policy of the past and say, how do we stay out of World War III? How do we stop our dependence on our enemy for our modern way of life? I've offered a clear plan for that. And most importantly, now more than ever, protect our own borders and protect our own citizens here in this homeland. Because if what happened on October 7th can happen in Israel, here's the hard truth. It could happen right here at home in the United States of America. And if I've done my job as your next president, we will make darn sure that it doesn't. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your question. Thank you. We'll come right here to the young woman in the room. Keep working our way up. You want to stand up?
Hi, Mr. Ramaswamy. It's an honor. I had a question. What motivates you to include publishing the Epstein list as an aspect of your campaign? And is a part of this posture influenced by sympathy with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein? Thank you.
Yes is the answer to your latter question, but it was part of a broader vision in this country, a radical idea that we have a government that actually just tells the truth to its people again. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking? You're 17.
Yeah.
You'll be 18 before November?
Yeah.
You can vote in the caucus. And I hope you do. But I think that it's your generation that, it's our generation in many ways. I grew up into a generation as well where our government has systematically lied to us for at least a couple of decades, as long as I can remember, about the basis for the 2008 financial crisis bailouts, about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that never was, about the origin of COVID-19. You're told that it didn't start in a lab and you're censored if you said it, before we now know that it did. About the Hunter Biden laptop story on the eve of the last election, dismissed by 50 intelligence officials of the U.S., dismissing it as Russian disinformation before after the election we learned it was true. The truth about what happened on January 6th, which only came out years later, video footage that wasn't released. The truth of how our own money is being spent in Ukraine. The truth about the Jeffrey Epstein client list, which I do not believe we've received. The truth about the Nashville transgender shooter manifesto, which we were lied to before it was leaked. We the people deserve a government that just tells us the truth again. And the reason people don't trust the government anymore is actually the government doesn't trust the people with the truth. Trust is a two-way relationship. And so I think two things need to happen in this country for us to rebuild trust in this country. I think one starts with the government, and I'm going to keep my promise on that. We're going to go back. As long as I've been an adult, certainly for this century, where have we lied to the people? The people have a sense that we've lied about matters that are important to the public. Where are we lying right now? And open the kimono and say, here's the truth. I know it's ugly, and people before believed that you couldn't handle it, but my conviction is we the people can handle the truth. We the people demand the truth. We require the truth. We got to see it to ever be able to fix it. That's what I'm going to give you on behalf of the government. And even though it's not my personal fault, I'll be the president when I say this, we are sorry to our citizens for betraying your trust for as long as I can remember. And I hope something then happens. I hope members of the media, at least one, steps up and says the same thing, looks their audience in the camera and says, you know what, we played interference for the government. We lied to you about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, about the COVID origin, about the truth of what really was going on with each of the foreign wars that we've entered on false premises over the course of the last 25 years. Go straight down the list and say, you know what, we weren't honest with you either. Here's what went wrong. Here's how we held the people who lied to you accountable. We're sorry, and here's how we'll ensure that something like that never happens again. Those two things happen, we're well on our way to reuniting this country. I think 80% of us in this country agree on the basic rules of the road. Not what the media tells you, not what social media looks like, but actual citizens. And that's the beauty of this process. I mean, even 2 nights ago, we had protesters at one of our events. We've had protesters barge into multiple of my events throughout this process. My rule of thumb, if it happens right here, as long as it's not cynical, paid-for people, but actual earnest people that have a view to share, we'll give them the mic and make their view known as long as they're able to sit down and be respectful of everybody else. 80% of our country shares the basic values in common, and half the 20% are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. I think we can bring them along too. That's how we're going to reunite this country, but the first step is we have to know that we're not being systematically lied to, and I'm sorry to say right now we are. And if there's one thing I get done as your next president, it'll be to shut down that deep state and make sure we the people, again, have the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. And so it's my care for the victims there, but it's also my care beyond that for this country to make sure we restore the truth in our government again. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. We'll come to this young woman right here.
Hi, so as the youngest Republican candidate for president, it's clear that the youth voice is important to you.
Yes.
And it's also clear from your words today that the Constitution and the rules are really important to you. So if the 26th Amendment guarantees the right to vote for people at the age of 18, why raise the voting age to 25?
So I'll tell you what my actual position is here, and I want to be crystal clear because everyone deserves to understand, and I stand by it. It is controversial. It was very controversial when I first unveiled it. Certainly in the state of Iowa, I think it's actually become more widely accepted over the course of this campaign. People have come out and listened and understood it. It's my belief we've lost our sense of civic duty and identity in this country. Young people today, I think it's true of all of us, have lost our sense of national pride. 25% of young Americans say they would not serve they're not proud enough to serve in our military. We have a 25% recruitment deficit in our military. 60% of Gen Z says they would sooner give up their right to vote than to give up their access to social media, including TikTok. That's just the hard fact. So what I've said is, look, how do we revive civic engagement amongst young people? And it's my belief that anybody who graduates from high school should have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a voting citizen of this country. We require it of our immigrants. We should require it of ourselves. I would require it of every American if I could, but we have an education system that we can at least start with the next generation where we may have failed with mine. And so if I could, I would do this across the board. But I think the best place to start with the future is to start now. Better late than never. Every immigrant has to know there's 3 branches of government, not 4. That the branch that the U.S. government, actually, that the U.S. president leads is the executive branch. Basics that we want an immigrant to know before they become full citizens of this country. I think we should expect that minimum of ourselves. And so that did generate a lot of, initially I actually unveiled it here in Iowa, not far from where we are right now. Generated some controversy. There was a 10-year-old girl by the name of Lena who apparently was reading in the paper about it. A few months later, she comes to one of my events. She's 10 years old. She comes very enthusiastically with a piece of paper, a handwritten note, and a packet. The packet was the 100-question civics test that most adults, even people my age, would fail if they took it today. 60% is a passing score. She gave it to me with a handwritten note saying that she wanted me to know that she, as a 10-year-old girl, took the whole thing and got 100 out of 100 on that civics test. And if she could do it, she hopes that every high school senior in this country can too. And if we're not doing that, that's not the fault of young people, that's the fault of an educational system that has failed our young people. That starts with that Department of Education, using our taxpayer money to foist radical racial and gender ideologies without actually providing the space for true civic education in this country. And so it's my job, as your president, to deliver the kinds of solutions to make sure that kids in the inner cities, across from the inner city of Chicago to Philadelphia, both of which I've visited in this campaign, aren't suffering at the behest of a bureaucracy that's failing our own students. They told us math is racist 2 years ago or a year ago. Math is not racist, but what might have been inequitable was failing to teach those kids in the inner city how to do math for those years that we actually stopped them from going to school during the pandemic. So I'm done with the woke smoke. Sometimes the truth is hard to swallow. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the truth. We have a loss of achievement and a loss of basic civic identity and pride in this country, and it's not going to happen automatically. It's not going to happen through modern social media. Just the fact of the matter is, I also stand for this. It's not a Democratic policy or a Republican one. If you can't smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18, if you can't have an addictive drink of alcohol by 21, I don't think you should be using an addictive social media product before the age of 16 either. So we're going to have to go deep in understanding how we revive this country, at least for the next generation, so we didn't make the same mistakes that we made with mine. But I do think it is a good thing for every American to know the basics of our country so that we once again are proud of a country that we actually know something about. So that's where I'm coming from, and I appreciate that question. Thank you. Thank you for asking it. I appreciate it. We'll go right there, and then if we come right up here. You have a question, young woman? All right, she was just stretching. I was really impressed if she asked a question.
Hi, as a first-generation legal immigrant, how do you feel about the families being separated at the border, and how would you, as a president, ensure their safety and ensure kind of like that family?
Thank you. So, I believe the nuclear family is the cornerstone of a great country and every great society that's ever existed in human history. All the way back to Aristotle, to our founding fathers, they understood that. I want to say one thing about that, and then I'll answer your question, is we're actually paying right now for the breakdown of the nuclear family. We're using our taxpayer money to pay single mothers more money not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house, including those inner cities that I visited. That's driving an epidemic of fatherlessness in this country. 25% of kids today are born into fatherless households. That means they're 8 times as likely to end up in prison, 10 times as likely not to graduate from high school or to end up in poverty. And we're using our own money to pay for it. So the thing I will end is we're not going to use our taxpayer money to anymore pay people to do the opposite of what's best for them. More money not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house. More money not to go to work instead of to go to work. More money not to repay your student loans than to repay your student loans. So that's a cornerstone of my domestic policy. And against that backdrop, you ask me a fair question. Because the family is a cornerstone of my policies for this country. Where does that leave me on the separation of families at the border? So my border policies, I believe, are tougher than any other presidential candidates in this race. And I've offered a clear plan of how we're going to use the military to secure the border. But I have pledged since day one we will never separate families as a pro-family candidate. Anybody who's in this country illegally as a family unit, with full respect and compassion and dignity, will be returned to their country of origin because that's the right thing to do for the country. And so you want to fix the border crisis in a nutshell, here's how we do it. We end foreign aid to Central America and Mexico and instead require each of those countries to protect their own borders, all the way from Venezuela to the southern border of Texas. Over 80% of the people coming to the United States via Mexico did not start in Mexico. So if we stop that northward flow, we've solved a major part of the problem. Next, not just build the wall, that's fine. Even Biden says that now. We have to be willing to use our own military to really seal our own southern border and send the signal that we're actually closed. We have 40,000 troops sitting in places like Germany. For why? Germany doesn't even spend 2% of its own GDP on its own national self-defense. That doesn't even meet the minimum NATO requirements. They're literally cheating us. Well, we're going to take troops from places like that and station them at least to protect our own border. Next, we will stop using our taxpayer money to pay sanctuary cities, to pay for literally breaking the rule of law, and the incentives to be here illegally. And I'm the only Republican candidate who can tell you this one. On day one, when I take office on January 20th, 2025, we will, on that day forward, end birthright citizenship for the kids of anybody who's in this country illegally. The Constitution says so. We just have to follow it. And then we're going to say anybody who's in this country illegally will be returned to their country of origin. And then we take a long, hard look at our legal immigration system. We want a championship team in the United States. We are and always have been a championship team, but the sole goal of our legal immigration policy should be what advances the interests of the citizens who are already here. I don't think that's too much to ask. And just in the same way as a father, my sole moral duty is to my family. As your next president, my sole moral duty is to the citizens of this nation, not any other one. There's two basic ideas of this candidacy, two basic things I'm going to restore as your next president. It's that the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who run the government, not the bureaucrats. And the moral duty that those elected leaders owe is to the citizens of the United States of America, not any other country. I don't think that's too much to ask. And the fact that the mainstream media will describe that to you as radical, or to use CNN's language, dangerous, or one of their anchors saying he was shaking as he heard me share some of these basic ideas, I think tells you how far we've come as a culture from our founding ideals. The question I ask is, if Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were here today, would they say they're proud of the way that we're operating our government? Or would they say they were appalled? I think they would be aghast. They wouldn't recognize the country that they set into motion. And by the time I leave office, if there's one thing I will tell you is our founding fathers will have a constitutional republic again with 3 branches of government, and our founding fathers will no longer be rolling over in their graves. That's my obligation as our next president. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You have a question right up here, sir?
Yeah, I was curious, throughout the campaign, throughout the campaign, you've supported President Trump despite running yourself. Yep. But many Republicans have cited his prosecutions and other legal issues as something that's a barrier, like the deep state or Democrats making sure he can't be president again. But President Trump's response has been calling himself a fighter, someone who can fight that. So why do you think, in the midst of President Trump running his own campaign, that you're the person best suited to fight for the conservative agenda?
Thank you. That's a very fair question, and I appreciate that. On the eve of the Iowa caucus, you have a decision to make tomorrow night. More than anybody else in this race, I have respected Donald Trump and his legacy because it's the right thing to do. He was an excellent president because he kept us out of war and he grew this economy. And I respect him now, and I will respect his legacy when I'm your next president. I have defended against these unconstitutional persecutions against him. I went to the Miami courthouse in that first federal prosecution to stand against this. I issued that day a FOIA demand, a Freedom of Information Act request, to tell us the truth. Again, a law that requires the government to tell you the truth. What did Biden and Merrick Garland tell Jack Smith? Tell the public that. Earlier this week, I personally filed an amicus brief with the U.S. Supreme Court, laying out what I view as the best legal arguments for why they have to overturn Colorado's disastrous decision. And I felt an obligation to do that for this country because I don't know if Trump's team will make those arguments, but they deserve to be made to the U.S. Supreme Court because it's about our country. So I've done everything in my power to push back against this. But at a certain point now, we have to open our eyes, people. First the protests, then the civil suits, then the state-level prosecution, then the first federal prosecution, then the second one. Now no prosecution at all. Now forget the judicial system altogether. Just take them off the ballot. And I've said every Republican should remove ourselves, myself included, from any ballot that wrongfully eliminates Trump from our primary to stand against election interference, because it's the right thing to do. But all this is just last year. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. We saw last time it was a man-made pandemic and a rigged election, at least by big tech, if not worse. This time I believe these people will stop at nothing, and I mean nothing, to keep this man away from the White House. It is disgusting, but we cannot fall for that trap. I think they're leading us into a trap. I think they want to narrow this down to a two-horse race between Donald Trump and a puppet who they can control. This spring or early summer, eliminate Trump one way or another, and then trot their puppet into the White House. And we cannot fall for that trap. Our America First movement did not start in 2016. It started in 1776. And so we owe it to our founding fathers and to this country to take our America First agenda. George Washington was the first America First conservative, actually. And I'm a George Washington America First conservative. We take that to the next level. So yes, we love the man, and I've stood with him because he got this fight started. But now it is our job, our duty, my responsibility to this country to finish it. And that is going to take somebody who, yes, comes from the outside, isn't bought and paid for, with fresh legs, who is not yet wounded in that war, to lead us to victory in this war. Somebody who can actually break things when necessary. Trump brought that, I bring that on steroids. But it's also going to take somebody who knows and deeply understands the law and the Constitution of this country. That's where they duped him. They told him, Mr. President, you can't fire those civil servants because of the civil service protections. Read the law. Those civil service protections only apply to individual employee firings. They do not apply to mass layoffs. And mass firings are absolutely what I am bringing to the DC bureaucracy. They told him, Mr. President, you can't end birthright citizenship for illegals without a constitutional amendment. Read the Constitution. The opening words of the 14th Amendment are clear. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. That means the kids of illegals don't enjoy birthright citizenship. They say, Mr. President, well, you can't really deport anybody who's in this country illegally because we only have 6,000 ICE agents, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agents. Read the law. The existing laws allow ICE and the Department of Homeland Security to at least have the warrants for illegals served via local law enforcement. That's 1 million local law enforcement who are standing by and ready to do it if you have a president that doesn't get duped by what the deep state tells you can and can't do. So it takes both of those things. Somebody who comes from the outside, an entrepreneur, a businessman, not a politician, but also one who knows and actually first personally understands the law and the Constitution. Those two things don't usually go together. You'll have the legal scholar over here, you'll have the businessman over here. Those two things don't usually go together, but that's why I'm in this. My faith teaches me God gives each of us our own unique God-given gifts. Every one of us has our own God-given gifts, and it is our duty to use those God-given gifts to do what is right in the short time that we're given. I believe there's one true God, and He put us here for a purpose. It is our duty to achieve that purpose. And when you're guided by that, I don't think some federal bureaucrat standing in my way seems like that much of an obstacle anymore. And so, yes, that is why, while I respect the heck out of Donald Trump, and I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking some decision that he made like the other candidates are, people say, well, you're not running against him. No, I'm not in some sense running against him. I'm running for this country. And so we'll honor that legacy, but I'm asking you to do the right thing tomorrow night. Even if that's different than what you were thinking about doing 3 weeks ago, or 3 months ago, or even when you walked in today. I'm asking you to do the right thing to save our country, to protect against this unconstitutional abuse of power. They're selling us the rope today that they're going to use to hang us tomorrow, and we cannot afford as a nation to fall for that trap. And so, yes, I'm asking for your vote tomorrow night to take our America First movement to the next level. America First doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to Trump. It belongs to you, to us, to we the people in this country. And we owe it to this nation and to our founding fathers to make sure our movement lives on. That is why I'm asking you to do the right thing tomorrow night. To tell 10 people who couldn't be in this packed room today, to still tell them about what we talked about here in this room today. To bring them to the Iowa caucus, too, to open their eyes to make sure that we're not led into this trap. And if we do the right thing for this country, if you all do the right thing tomorrow night, are you?
I'm a student journalist.
You look
so
young. Okay, yeah. But I will say that if all of us who are able do the right thing, then I am confident we don't have to be this nation in decline anymore. We don't have to be at the end of the ancient Roman Empire. I think the truth is, as a nation right now, I think what George Washington would say if he were here right now. He would say that as a nation, we are all really still a little young, actually. Going through our own version of our adolescence, figuring out who we're going to be when we grow up. And when you view it that way, it makes sense again, actually. You go through your adolescence, you go through that identity crisis. You lose your way a little bit. You do some stupid things. But we are stronger for it when we get to our adulthood on the other side. So no, I don't think we have to be this nation in decline. I think we still can be a nation in our ascent. Maybe even the early stages of our ascent. Maybe we're not even at base camp. On our way still to that shining city on a hill. That country where we will still look our kids in the eye and mean it when we tell them you get ahead of the United States of America with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication. And that, you know what, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And with your help tomorrow night, that is what we will revive to save this great nation. Thank you for coming today, guys. God bless you and your families, and may God bless our United States of America. We will not stop until we save this nation. Thank you for coming, guys. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.